I'm Pastor Steve Talmage of Love of Christ Lutheran Church, and each week Pastor Nanette Christofferson and I try to provide a brief introduction to two of the assigned Bible readings. We're going to take a look at the Old Testament first lesson for Sunday, October 8, 2023, Isaiah 5, verses 1 to 7. Just a brief review of Isaiah. Isaiah is one of four major prophets in the Jewish Bible, our Old Testament. He joins Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. They're called the major prophets due to the length of time their works cover, not because they are more important than the others. The prophets speak primarily to the time leading up to, during, and after the 12 tribes are exiled from the Promised Land. There are two major exiles in the history of Israel. The first happens under the reign of the Assyrian Empire. During that exile, the 10 northern tribes are taken off into the Assyrian Empire, and the final date is 722, 721, when the capital of the northern tribes, Samaria, falls. And then Assyria starts to make their way to the southern two tribes remaining. But they have internal problems back home, and they end up having to retreat. And after that, internal problems with Assyria, they become vulnerable, and the Babylonians are the next major world power to come through there. And they come on their way to Egypt and do destroy the city of Jerusalem in 586 BCE, including Solomon's temple. That exile takes people off to various parts of the empire and leaves the 12 tribes, the nation of Israel, just in rubble. The structure of the book. Isaiah 6 describes his call during the year of King Uzziah's death, 740 BCE. So this is before the Assyrians come in. Scholars now divide Isaiah into three sections. First Isaiah, chapters 1 to 39, second Isaiah 40 to 55, and third Isaiah 56 to 66. The first faced the Assyrian threat. The second was written during the Babylonian exile, and the third was written about the time of the return to Judah, to Jerusalem, allowed under King Cyrus. So we're covering about 200 years of history. That's why Isaiah is considered a major prophet. Chapter 1 in Isaiah addresses the sordid corruption of Judah, the southern kingdom. They've rejected God. They are morally degraded, socially unjust, and religiously hypocritical. Swift and terrible judgment is coming to those who refuse to return to the way of the Lord. That's why repent is a big word. Change direction. Reorient your life towards the way of God. Chapters 2 to 4 leading up to our reading for Sunday. In these chapters, Isaiah looks far ahead to the time when Jerusalem will become the city of God for the people of all nations. Notice it's all nations. It is not just for the Jewish people. And this is an early glimpse into God's intent to be a blessing to the world, so that all might come to know who the God it is of Israel and Judaism, and revealed through Jesus. But before that, God will execute fierce judgment on all the wickedness and pride which pollute his people. For evil has no place in the renewed city. So it's going to be a great do-over. Well, now we get to chapter 5. What's going on? And like many of the prophets, we have prose and we have poetry, we have songs, and this one is a song of the unfruitful vineyard in chapter 5, and we get a little beginning of this song. We start in verse 1. Let me sing for my beloved. This is how God feels about God's people. My beloved, my love. Song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill, Mount Zion, where the temple is built. He dug it, and it cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it, and he hewed out a wine vat in it. He expected it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. So we have this imagery of that city on a hill, that light shining to the world. And in this case, we have the language of agricultural bounty, a vineyard that is planned to produce lush grapes, the fruit of the vine, wonderful wine, to enrich and bless all who are able to taste from it. God invested by digging and clearing it, and you're going to hear this in our gospel reading for Sunday as well, in the parable that Jesus tells. Planted it with choice vines, he built a watchtower to protect it and look over it, made a big wine vat, preparing for the harvest that will come. And there was expectation. There was expectation that this vineyard would produce the best fruit the world has to offer. But it yielded wild grapes. 3-4. And now, inhabitants of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I've not done in it? Notice, God is the owner. God is the one who's done the work to get the people into that vineyard, to provide for its bounty and its abundance. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? This is a question God is asking through the prophet to the people who hear the song. When I expected it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? Wild grapes. Well, if you read the Old Testament and you read this time period during Israel's history, you can see there were unjust kings, there were corrupt kings in their courts, and prophets, along with Isaiah, continued to call the people to turn back to the ways of God rather than the ways of the world. And when you read most of the prophets in the Old Testament, you're going to see they're going to speak out to God's people, not bearing the fruit that the Ten Commandments describe, where people are honoring God, where families are places of a witness of stability and love and support, and love of neighbor and care of neighbor and community is taking place. What the prophets almost always speak out against is they chase after other gods, they practice idolatry, they practice religious and sexual immorality by bringing in other gods that have temple prostitution and prostitutes at their shrines. They practice injustice, particularly towards the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, the poor. They are ungrateful for all that God has provided for them, as described in this song. All of that's there over and over again. Listen to verse 5 and following. And now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and it shall be overgrown with briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. But the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his pleasant planting. He expected justice, but saw bloodshed. Righteousness, but heard a cry. This is the reality. God gets the people into the promised land. He gives them the Ten Commandments. He makes promises to provide and guide them. He invites and challenges them to worship only him. He raises up kings to provide guidance and protection for them, even though he told them they should only have one king, and that should be God. And then we see the consequences. The consequences are described here in, agrarian terms of what's going to happen when the Babylonian army comes to Jerusalem. The hedge of protection is removed, and that allows the wild animals to come and eat the fruit. The wall is going to be broken down so people can just march on through your fields. They're going to make it a waste. It's not going to be pruned or hoed, so it's just going to be basically a wasteland. filled with briars and thorns. And then there's going to be drought to dry up the crop. This describes the exile. And people are going to say, why? Why did this happen? Isaiah doesn't leave it a mystery, because God speaks through Isaiah to say, what did I want? I wanted justice. I expected justice, but instead I see bloodshed. I see violence. I see eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. I see people exploiting the most vulnerable in our communities and population. I see people chasing after personal gain and power at the expense of building up community. And then righteousness, this harmony of living in right relationship with God and neighbor that Jesus says are the ultimate commandments that we're called to follow. And because this is all broken down and there is no righteousness in the land, all God hears is a cry. A cry. These are hard words, and they're spoken at the very beginning of Isaiah. You've got to go all the way through Isaiah to get a vision of hope and restoration, and it's there. And it's there. But we have to put this all in the context of the Old Testament, the Jewish Bible, the history of Israel, and then what Jesus is going to reveal in light of that history. So, continue to read all of chapter 5 to get a sense of it. It's not easy reading, but we get a graphic image of the relationship of God with God's people and the consequences that come when people fail to worship God alone. Take care. God bless.